Okay, welcome to everybody. My name is Barbara Dickinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of Handley Regional Library. The Friends have been around since 1977. We've always been around to support the library. Sometimes it's been through the, let's see, I'm gonna change a second, through supporting them by bringing money to the library, but always we've been supportive by bringing programs to the community. And along those many years, we've developed friendships or we've co-sponsored programs, and we've found good friends like our friends at the Winchester Frederick County Historical Society that are co-producers of today's program, the Creative Women of Fishers Hill. Before we get started with introductions and get onto the good part of the program, I just want to get a little bit about etiquette. We're asking all of you today to enter your questions into the chat feature. As soon as they pop up, you can enter them in there. And when we finish the program, I will be the one that deliver the questions to the participants. We found along the way, sometimes we'll have 3 or 4 questions of the same topic, and therefore I can combine it into that. So that'll be at the end of our program. And in a few days, we will have transferred this to our YouTube channel on the library's page. So you can go to the Handley Regional Library page and go down to the little YouTube icon and click on it, watch this again, share it with some friends that maybe weren't able to attend today. And also those of you that registered for this, you'll get an email response that will show you, give you a little bit of information that we talked about today. So that'll be again coming to you later in the week. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Vice President for Programming for Winchester Frederick County Historical Society, Susie Whitaker. She's here to introduce our wonderful programs tonight, this afternoon, this morning. Enjoy it whenever you're watching this. Take it away, Susie. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I would like to introduce our presenters today. Our first presenter is Cheryl Lyon, who's retired from designing and making products for museums. She has a long family history with a connection to Fishers Hill, Virginia. She's currently living in Dayton, where Cheryl owns the historic Silver Lake Mill. She's actively involved with Rockingham County history. Veteran public educator Hope Brim has been interested in Strasburg history for a long time. She currently serves as board secretary for the Strasburg Museum and is a co-chairwoman of the Ladies Horticultural Luncheon held in conjunction with the Apple Blossom Festival. Hope lives in a historic home in Strasburg. Our third presenter is Neil Thorne. He's a professional statistician and analyst. Neil is a Shenandoah County native with a passion for research and history. He's an active member of the Strasburg Museum. He lives in Fishers Hill in a restored federal home. Sadly, they lost the 4th member of their group in September 2021, Gloria Stickley. Her footprint is a part of their presentation and will be visible throughout their upcoming book, Forgotten Journeys, the Fishers Hill Ladies Project. Gloria was an early and enthusiastic project member while serving as president of the Strasburg Museum. A retired high school librarian, she was author of Strasburg, Virginia, Our History and Postcards, co-author of Reflections, Early Schools of Shenandoah County, and is co-author with Reverend William Hall of the recently published book, Legacy, A History of St. Paul's Lutheran Church, Strasburg, Virginia, 1700s to 2000. We are very proud to present the Creative Women of Fishers Hill.
Good morning to each of you. We appreciate your interest in what has been a fascinating journey for us as part of the Fishers Hill Ladies Project. This is a story of 3 women, 2 are artists and 1 is a writer, who defied the odds for success for women in the 1880s. They traveled in magnificent style. They stayed in opulent Gilded Age hotels. They rubbed shoulders with America's wealthiest families, and newspaper journalists across the nation and even in Europe would report on their lives. And they quietly pursued all the things that women should not do in the 1880s. Each one of the three of us will be talking about one of the three women who make up our focus today. I'll be talking about Maria Jc Beckett. When Maria Beckett, and perhaps Bertha Von Hillen with her, stepped off the train in Strasbourg on a summer day in 1880, I think they knew they had come to the right place. On the outskirts of the town, the terrain was rugged, the trees were tall, and there were lots of oaks. Maria's training in France had taught her to love the Barbizon style of art that sought out nature and sought to pursue realism. Maria had spent almost 40 years coming to this point and this place. Sadly, we have not in 4 years been able to uncover a photograph of Maria, who was called a brilliant conversationalist by many people. In fact, one journalist wrote, and I quote, "She is a little woman with a face that shows the sentiment of triumph through trial, the result of hard work, hard thinking, and hard blows from fate, and a perfect understanding of the way to meet and bear them." The writer went on to say that Maria was perfectly unconventional in her dress and manners, and she governed both with taste rather than fashion. Born in 1839 in Portland, Maine, Maria was the daughter of an apothecary, what we would call today a pharmacist. His name was Charles Beckett, and he became a part-time landscape painter of some note, both then and still today is quite renowned in the New England area. He encouraged Maria's obvious talent for art. In 1864, when she was about 25, she walked into a Catholic church in Portland and sat down in a rear pew, and she was suddenly flooded with the belief that she was Catholic, and she could instantly recite these complicated Catholic catechisms. She had been raised as a staunch Protestant, and becoming Catholic in Maine was not something you would do voluntarily in those particular times. She never wavered in her faith, her Catholic faith, over the next 40 years. Her faith shaped her closest friendships. They influenced who her best art clients were, and it was a very important part of her daily life. One of the hard blows from fate to Maria was the Great Fire of Portland that started on July 4th in the afternoon in 1866, and it continued for about 12 hours. This painting is by Maria's cousin, George Edward Morse, who's also a relatively well-known painter in the New England area. And he shows Congress Street in this painting, where both the Beckett home and Maria's father had his apothecary shop. Over 12,000 people were left homeless by the fire. It was the most destructive fire in United States history at that point in time. Here's a stereographic card showing Congress Street when the fire was done. It's essentially the same view we just saw in George Edward Morse's painting. It's Congress Street, and there was just nothing left. Another great blow came to Maria from the fire when her father died, probably from long-term damage caused by the fire. He started rebuilding the large home and apothecary immediately, going heavily into debt. When he died, creditors began forcing the sale of the partially completed assets. Maria had to borrow several dollars from the Sisters of Notre Dame, who were from Montreal but were working in Portland. And she used those, I think it was about $8. She used that money to get to Boston, where she started working hard on her art in an effort to get to the point of being able to support herself. She managed to get a trip to Paris and Rome for 15 months and returned to Boston, where she began studying under artist William Morris Hunt. He was the first in Boston willing to teach women. He was one of the first in the United States to be willing to teach women. With his encouragement, she left again for France in 1876, and when she arrived, she went straight to the home of Charles Francois d'Aubigny, and she convinced him to take her on as a student. According to her accounts of this, he had never formally accepted a student before. Studying under d'Aubigny became a pivotal event in her life. He was a leader in the Barbizon movement in France, and he served as Maria's mentor, and she reflected throughout her life his influence. She actually lived with the d'Aubigny family and went out daily on his small boat that was affectionately called Le Bottin on the Was River. In fact, here you see it's a little shelter that's on this flat-bottomed boat, and they would go up and down the river every day, choosing where to stop and paint, choosing what lighting they wanted to use, the angle of view. They had a grand time. And d'Aubigny, throughout her 6-month stay with him and his family, was totally encouraging of Maria and her work. After she got back to Boston, about 2 months, some friends encouraged her to come watch Bertha Von Hillen do an exhibition of her walking. And somehow at that exhibition, Maria managed to meet Bertha Von Hillen, and they became friends, and Maria began encouraging Bertha's lifelong interest in art, and later helped her begin some art classes. d'Aubigny had planned to come to America for a tour, but sadly he became ill and he died in 1878. Then William Morris Hunt, the art instructor for both Maria and Bertha, about a year later also died somewhat unexpectedly. And both women were left without an anchor or foothold in the art world. So Maria as teacher and Bertha as student devised a plan to seek a rustic terrain like the forest of Fontainebleau in France that attracted Barbizon artists. And that's exactly what they did when they discovered North Mountain that you see here. That's when they came down the B&O Railroad, likely getting off at Strasburg Junction. Maria convinced the Abram Bard family to rent a large room on the second floor that overlooked a little outbuilding for the farm. And that small outbuilding would serve as their studio. It was probably placed about where you see the little tan cottage off to the left there. And the room they rented is, as you face the house right now, it would have been on the upper left and ran from front to back of the house. The house was described in tremendous detail, in their room in tremendous detail, in an 1884 newspaper. And we were able to absolutely confirm that it was the house. They would, from this house, they would walk 9 miles every day, round trip, to the Strasburg post office. Now, can you imagine? We complain about the mail, but I think that's worthy of a lot of comments. And they were known even on some days to do 2 round trips if they were expecting something important. Their entire business life was conducted by mail, arranging for exhibitions, being able to participate in expositions, arranging hotels in various cities, arranging travel plans city to city. All of this was done by mail. Even checks from clients and from galleries and so forth, it all came by mail. So it was very important. But the rustic terrain was just as important to them for the purposes of painting. They typically would spend 8 or 9 months of the year at Fisher's Hill and 3 to 4 months on the road. And what you see here is a bill of lading that was for the B&O, and it was for Strasburg Junction. It was July of 1884. And they were creating their own paintings, and they were sending 2 crates on this shipment. And it was going to what was then termed a World's Fair in Louisville, Kentucky. Now imagine, from Fisher's Hill they're shipping two paintings from there to a World's Fair. I just think that's extraordinary. We were able to determine what two paintings actually were shipped that day. We were fortunate enough to be able to get a catalog of that World's Fair art exhibit. And Bertha's painting in one crate was titled The Monk Felix. Now, back in the 1880s, the technology for printing didn't exist to accurately reproduce a painting in full color. And so sometimes the exhibition would ask the artist, such as they did here, to make an illustration to represent the painting. And so this is Bertha's illustration representing the painting, The Monk Felix. We have this, but the painting itself is unfortunately lost. The name of Maria's painting that went that day to the World's Fair was On the Border of the Forest, Front Royal. This may be that painting. It's somewhat uncertain, but this is a possibility. Often these two ladies both focused and specialized in forest scenes, woods and trees and leaves and paths and sometimes farm animals like sheep or cows grazing in the woods. And the paintings often carried very similar titles. So Maria would have a number of them that might say On the Border of the Forest. One might be Front Royal, one might be another town. And then you've got Bertha's versions of things like that too. And to add further compounding of the problems, they would often alter the names on the same paintings, I think in an effort to make them more appealing to certain customers. So it gets very complicated. And the two ladies, unfortunately, rarely inscribed the title on the back of the painting or anywhere. So the titles are just very similar. It's very hard, but this one might be the Front Royal painting that went to the World's Fair that day. After spending 8 or 9 months in Fisher's Hill, they would stay usually through Christmas and also through New Year's. And it was usually right after New Year's, maybe the first week, usually no later than the second week. They would leave Fisher's Hill and they would have shipped all their paintings along the coast that they were going to, and they would go to Boston, and that's the upper right corner arrow there. And they would start there. Sometimes they had private exhibitions in privately owned galleries, and maybe at the same time they were also participating in large shows where there are hundreds of paintings. And when they finished in Boston, they'd move on often to New York, usually Philadelphia, as well as Baltimore and Washington, and eventually find their way back at Fisher's Hill. There are also some secondary cities. Occasionally they would go there, but I would say it was more common for them to ship their paintings to those locations. Those included Cincinnati, Louisville, Chicago, Denver, Atlanta, Portland, Maine, and just recently fell into finding one that was, I think it was in Santa Barbara, California, that Bertha had sent there. This pattern continued until 1887, when Maria decided she needed to move and she wanted to go live in New York City. She was nearing 50 years old, and the rugged life at Fisher's Hill was tough on her. In later years, she described having to build the crates for the paintings, getting the paintings fitting well so they wouldn't be damaged in the crates, getting the crates onto the wagons, to get the wagon to the train station, off the wagon into the train station. And then for paintings that didn't sell, that whole process had to be reversed. And so they would have to receive the paintings back, get them out of the crates and so forth. So it was tough. Bertha was much younger, almost 20 years younger. And so this was not as hard a life on Bertha as it was on Maria. From there, Maria moved to the Sherwood Building, which was an extraordinary place just for artists in New York City. There was, imagine this in the 1880s, there was a restaurant on the first floor of this multi-story artist building. And the resident artists could eat 1, 2, 3 meals there every day, or they didn't have to eat there. They could bring a client there for a good meal and have some good discussion. The apartments in the building included living quarters. They had studio spaces that were actually working spaces as part of the apartment. And then they had sort of a presentation space where they could, it wasn't messy, it was very elegant, and they could present their finished pieces to the clients. And the old adage of location, 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 this wonderful multi-storied building was just doors away from mansion homes, such as those owned by the Vanderbilt family and many other famous wealthy American families. Using the Sherwood as her home base, her winters were spent at the Ponce de Leon Hotel in St. Augustine. And that's what you're seeing here. There was a wing on the back of this hotel that was just nothing but artist studios. And Maria would have one of those in most winters from the time that she left Fisher's Hill. And they had Friday evening receptions and soirees that were renowned throughout the Florida area. And Maria was actually a star of many of those because of her abilities with conversation. She was very popular there. The hotel was owned by Henry Flagler, who was also one of her clients. And if you recognize the name, you may know him from having been one of the founders and owners of Standard Oil. Maria spent her summers in Bar Harbor, Maine, where she would also paint daily in a large studio and sell her work to the very famous families who summered there. Maria's greatest achievement may have been in 1893, when her painting titled The Storm was shown at the 1893 Columbian Exposition, a World's Fair in Chicago. It was probably the largest World's Fair ever held to that point. She considered The Storm to be her best painting and said many times that she could never sell it. The painting, this picture you're seeing right now, the painting was actually hanging in this rotunda. It was the place of honor, if you will, for the Women's Building. And unfortunately, any photos we found in this rotunda did not include Maria's painting. Her painting was actually about 20 to 25 feet to the left off the edge of the image here. And very sadly, despite all the writers describing the painting, we at least have their written descriptions. The painting itself is lost and has not been found, as far as I know, known where it was during the 20th century or the 21st century. When Maria died in 1904, it was September of 1904, the age of 65, there were 350 paintings that were unframed and left behind. She had planned to sell them. She'd been saving them up, and she planned to sell them, and she was going to use the money to support struggling young artists. Unfortunately, it did not happen. We finally learned 2 weeks ago, this has been a very recent development that we've worked on for a long time. We found out where she is buried. It is in Calvary Cemetery in Queens, New York. Her grave is not marked, but her brother John, who was a writer of some note in the same period of time, he wrote for magazines like Cosmopolitan. Her brother John is buried in the same grave, and the little white cross that you see slightly to the left of center in this photograph has John's name on it and the plot number of the cemetery. It doesn't even have John's birth date or death date. He did die about 1911, I believe. Sort of it was sad to us to learn that this was the situation. But I will say that one good thing was she died in September of 1904, and on January 1, 1905, the New York Times had pretty much a full-page article that was ran across the entire, I don't know if that was a 6 or 8 column newspaper, but spanned the entire top of the newspaper, that said 45 great women whose careers ended in 1904. And Maria's was right there among those 45 great women. And I am so thankful. I think we're all very thankful for that. And now I think that Neil is going to talk about Bertha Von Hillen.
So who was Bertha Von Hillen? We know very little of her early life. Bertha was thought to have been born around 1857 in Trier, Germany, and made it to the United States around 1876 as a penniless 19-year-old immigrant. Bertha's goal was to study art in the United States, but that goal would require money. And on arrival here, she was a promising pedestrian. It was the sport of pedestrianism that would gain Bertha the money she needed. So what is pedestrianism? Pedestrianism is the forerunner of modern day race walking. It was an extremely popular sport in the late 1800s, both in competitions and exhibitions. These competitions and exhibitions were mostly conducted as multi-day events in large halls packed with paying crowds and bands. In Bertha's 2-year career as a pedestrian, she accomplished over 30 exhibitions and races between 1876 and 1878. Exhibitions and races that were up and down the East Coast and as far west as Kentucky, Illinois, and Ohio. The turnaround time between many of these events was mere days. These were grueling feats of athleticism and endurance. 14 of these were over 100 miles. The furthest was 350 miles. Her average race or exhibition was 102 miles. Bertha was an outspoken advocate for physical exercise and healthy living, especially for women. Her athleticism was studied by multiple doctors, particularly Dr. Alonzo Keat, a pioneer in both cardiography and blood pressure studies and equipment. It was at one of these walking exhibitions that Bertha met Maria Beckett as well. They were kindred spirits from the start. Maria was an established artist, and Bertha was working so hard towards that goal. Maria shared Bertha's interest in both exercise and healthy living. That June of 1878, having saved enough money, Bertha was able to retire from the pedestrian sport, and Maria helped introduce Bertha into the world of art. Bertha began her art studies under Dr. William T. Rimmer. He was a physician turned artist who was teaching at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Rimmer was most famous for anatomical illustrations and sculpture, but also produced notable paintings as well. Dr. Rimmer also happened to be a friend of famous American portrait and landscape artist William Morris Hunt. Now, Bertha's friend Maria was already a favored student of Hunt's at this time. Bertha soon joined Maria in Hunt's studio, where they both established and further developed their landscape art techniques. But when Hunt died in September of 1879, Bertha and Maria were left adrift to venture on their own, to move forward and establish themselves in the art world. It was not long after Hunt's death that Bertha and Maria discovered Fisher's Hill. They most likely discovered this place by rail, as it's on the Baltimore and Ohio Shenandoah Valley Spur. Bertha and Maria felt the beauty and light of the Shenandoah Valley was conducive to their work, as well as the peaceful solitude. They established their studio at Fisher's Hill, at the Barb home, where they worked on their art generally 8 months out of the year. Even though Bertha and Maria enjoyed the peaceful solitude, they were not hermiting artists in their time here. Both were devout Catholics, making weekly treks to the nearest mass in Front Royal or Woodstock, some 12 to 15 miles away, one way. On their Sunday returns, they acted as the community's doctors, helping the local poor who could not afford the town doctor. Bertha's knowledge of physical exercise and healthy living, coupled with her studies under Dr. Rimmer, and further combined with Maria's knowledge of apothecary, filled this community's need. But every year, the time would come to leave their beloved studio at Fisher's Hill, to exhibit and sell their art and gain sponsors. Bertha and Maria traveled the East Coast and across the country together as the art became known. This was the Gilded Age, an age of great disparity, but the wealthy were buying and commissioning art at exorbitant prices, providing a very comfortable living for Bertha and Maria. They exhibited in the great cities like Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, New Orleans, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and others. Both traveled in absolute luxury, guests of the wealthy, invited to stay in the finest hotels to entertain the rich with their work. It must be noted, too, that Maria was considerably older than Bertha by some 18 years. For nearly 10 years, Maria had been able to keep up with Bertha. But in 1887, at the age of 49, Maria needed to slow her pace of life. Maria moved back to New York to a more refined and gentler lifestyle. It was about this time 31-year-old Bertha met author and activist Emma Howard White. 25-year-old Emma joined Bertha for a summer at the Fisher's Hill studio. Emma could keep up with Bertha, but Emma was also a socialite. The two made a fateful decision to abandon the Fisher's Hill studio and move closer to town. Bertha and Emma purchased land in Middletown, Virginia, only 8 miles away. More precisely, in a section named New Middletown. Now, this property was part of a failed 1890 development scheme. The land was contested. It had dubious deeds. Transactions and right-of-ways were not above board in all cases. Here they built a small home and studio, but they were not made to feel welcome from the start. By 1902, their home had already been burglarized. They were chasing away lurkers at night, and these intimidations continued through 1910 when their dog was poisoned. And their home was burned by arson, and what was believed to be arson soon after. Bertha and Emma lost everything in that fire. Bertha lost all of her stockpiled paintings, as well as her tools to create new artwork. Bertha and Emma attempted to move forward after the fire, remaining in Middletown, renting and purchasing property along Main Street. But Bertha is shown as unemployed by 1920. And then between 1920 and 1930, Bertha is trying to reinvent herself as a baker. However, at this point in her life, Bertha's health and finances are in a downward spiral. In 1934, at the age of 37, the once great athlete and artist, now suffering from dementia, is placed into the notorious Western State Hospital in Stanton, a place at the time and by understanding could be likened to hell on earth. Within 5 years, Bertha would be dead. It is unimaginable what she would have gone through in her time here. To this day, we will never know, as her hospital records are still permanently sealed and marked for destruction. When Bertha died in 1939, her body was placed in a cardboard box and buried in an unmarked grave on hospital grounds. And we found the site of her burial just a few years ago. Now, I hope we'll talk to you a little bit about Emma Howard White.
The two women you just heard about, would you describe?
Hope, we can't hear you. Hope, I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh, I was unmuted, I thought.
I thought so too. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I know I was unmuted. You want me to start again?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay. Sorry. Independent, ahead of her time in principles and career, a visionary, creative, successful, making her way and voice in a male-dominated world. Catholic, had connections and associations with some people of influence, wealth, and fame. Reached the pinnacle of her career to only leave the world in a sad and less prosperous way. Would you agree that those are qualities that describe both Bertha and Maria? At the end of this talk, I believe you will also agree that Emma Howard Wright could be described in a similar way. Emma's creativity, though, was in writing, not in art. You have learned about the Maria and Bertha years, and now we will discuss the Bertha and Emma years. I would like to divide my talk into two parts. I will concentrate on an overview of Emma's career and life, and then wrap up with some local tidbits about Emma. Emma Howard Wright was born in Baltimore in 1863. Her father was a well-known tobacco broker. Her paternal roots can be traced back to immigrants coming with Lord Baltimore from England to the New World. At a young age, her exceptional writing skills were recognized. She was encouraged by her peers and later in her professional career by Bertha. Emma's writing spanned all the genres: short stories, novels, books, magazine and newspaper articles, Catholic publications, plays and playlets, and radio scripts. And I think Neil's now going to show a few examples, 3 examples of her books. Emma was determined to stay abreast of the newest ventures of her day, so she also became involved in another type of writing, creating photoplays, probably a precursor to the silent movies. A photoplay would use still photos to tell a story. She had professional connections with a company that would eventually become Paramount Pictures. Regarding her newspaper career and the premise that she, like Maria and Bertha, had connections, Emma benefited from her association with W.D. Boyce and Joseph Boyles, both based in Chicago. Often her newspaper items were placed on the front pages of these 2 men's publications. It also seems natural that she would meet up with and be associated with W.D. Boyce, with her human rights interest, because he would be the founder of the Boy Scouts of America. He was very adamant about how well his newsboys, I think they totaled 30,000, that were employed by him would be well taken care of. He also employed women in his workplace. I'm sure Emma was very impressed with this practice by a man at that particular time, employing so many females. He also supported labor unions. Mr. Boyles was in the syndication business, which often worked to Emma's advantage. Many of her works from the newspapers were syndicated. Emma was also actively involved in promoting women, including African-American women. She was actively involved in promoting the role that they could have in the changing times of the early decades of the 20th century. To illustrate this, I'd like to share 3 newspaper articles. A short excerpt from a local paper was written by Emma in response to one written by a gentleman who felt that we needed to keep women in their place. Emma, of course, would have none of that. She wrote back, "Women are no longer to be ornaments." A July 8, 1918 article from the Winchester Star. Miss Emma Howard Wright made an address on our flag at Mount Zion ME Church in Strasburg last Sunday on the occasion of Children's Day services. Miss Wright gave some interesting information relative to the work that the colored women are doing for the government. They raised $5 million during the last Liberty Loan. Poor colored women in a tobacco factory in Norfolk alone raised $91,000. At that time, the National Association of Colored Women had a membership of $100,000. Another article from the September 1, 1920 Stanton News Leader I found particularly interesting about its reference to Winchester. From that clipping, Emma Howard Wright received a telegram from the national headquarters of the Woman's Party encouraging Virginia women to register to vote without delay. Miss Wright expects to inaugurate a campaign here in the Winchester area and elsewhere to line up the women eligible to vote. Excuse me. The short article also pointed out that the women in this section of Virginia have not been enthused as much as had been predicted over the right to vote and register for the upcoming election. Up to Sunday night, less than 30 women had registered in Winchester. although much publicity had been given regarding the simple rules of procedure provided by the last legislature. It is not known after participation by the lady. She, Virginia Republican national convention held it after four rounds of ballots lost to who would be the future president, Warren G. Harding. A talented and creative literary career and her role as an activist earned her the honor of being featured in the 1893 book, A Woman of the Century by Frances Willard, who was the founder of the World Women's Christian Temperance Union. Over 1,400 people were included. The only known photograph of Emma appeared in that book, and why her picture was included makes me curious, but I'm so glad it was. Two highlights from her bio script I would like to highlight. The novel Passion Flowers of the Cross, which appeared in 1891, made a great stir in the literary world. The second highlight, she is very fond of outdoor exercise as a panacea for nearly all physical ills and a great promoter of health and beauty. Have we heard that belief earlier when hearing about Bertha and Maria? Just a few of the women featured in this collection of women of that particular century were Clara Barton, Louisa May Alcott, and Susan B. Anthony. Now for a few local tidbits. Some of you may even have a copy of this booklet. A collection of local stories includes an entry that I will share with you by Emma Howard Wright. This booklet was a fundraiser for the Ladies Civic League of Winchester in 1931 for their milk fundraiser. And again, it was reissued in 1976 as part of the bicentennial year. Now we'll share a part of this excerpt by Emma in this publication. You'll remember the house that Cheryl had the aerial view of, and also the painting that Neil referred to. The square red brick house about 2 miles from Fisher's Hill Station, known as the Barb Farmhouse, has many historical associations. During the Civil War, the Battle of Fisher's Hill was fought within a stone's throw of it, and many skirmishes took place in this vicinity. It was frequently used as a hospital for the wounded soldiers of both armies. And soon after the close of the Civil War, the farmhouse and vicinity acquired an uncanny reputation. It was said to be haunted. Miss Bertha Von Hillen, now of Winchester, and a fellow artist, Maria Beckett of Boston, have for several years a summer studio at the farmhouse. These artists, both women of intelligence, claim to have seen strange things and heard strange sounds while spending their summers at the farmhouse. Near the farmhouse, on the road to Fisher's Hill, is a wooded hill known as Red Hill because of the color of the soil. Seated upon the porch of the farmhouse in the evenings, Miss Von Hillen and Miss Beckett have frequently heard a sound like the trampling of marching men over Red Hill. Sometimes in walking over the hill, the artists found this sound so pronounced as to convey the impression that troops were actually bearing down upon them. Now we'll move on to Middletown. Living in Middletown, the 1910 census listed the two ladies' occupations: Emma, a fiction writer, and Bertha as a landscape artist. But an additional note stated that they worked on their own and were not employed by someone else, which I thought was kind of interesting, illustrated their spunkiness and their independent spirit. While in Middletown, they also were part of a fundraiser, two fundraisers that would benefit the Mount Carmel Cemetery Society. And these plays were based on creations by Emma. Neil referred to the Middletown Development and Land Improvement Company a little bit ago, and I want to follow up on that. When it was unsuccessful, the developer, Samuel Sperry, tried to purchase back some of the lots that had been part of his farm. He started plowing up the land and the streets for crops. Emma, without a lawyer, sued him. Well, you know who won? Emma. And you know who was found in contempt of court? Mr. Sperry. The court ruled that he had not and could not purchase the streets, as the streets had been laid out and dedicated. Interesting enough, that lawsuit had the effect of preserving most of the streets that had been laid out in 1890. Frederick County's GIS map of that area today matches near perfectly with the map published by the Middletown Land and Improvement Company over 100 years ago. Streets still feature the same names, park spaces are still there. Lots are still marked off in the same way. And if you'll look at this diagram, the two lots that held the ladies' summer cottage, lots 12 and 24 of block 40 in red there, are still there and facing the town cemetery, Mount Carmel, located diagonal from the cottage they had constructed. And now for the Winchester years. Some of you may recognize the Sarah Zane firehouse and the house beside of it. Emma and Bertha lived on Loudon Street next door to the Sarah Zane firehouse. Some of you probably know that these two buildings are currently undergoing a major renovation, not too far up from the Hanley Library. The next two slides show the house that they lived on in Cameron Street. There's the house and then a close-up of the porch. In wrapping up, I want to share a story in the Daily Independent, a Winchester paper at the time. Emma wrote about a fundraiser for the annual Apple Blossom Festival. This article, July 15th, 1924, excuse me, was a composition in which she did an analogy between a rose and an apple blossom. She said they're both fragrant, delightful, and beautiful, but only the more practical apple blossom will produce fruit and a harvest. Could we use that comparison for the lives of Bertha, Maria, and Emma? What did they make of their lives? The harvests produced by all three ladies, individually as well as collectively, were abundant. Emma Howard Wright was sent to the poorhouse on October 24th, 1934, possibly because Bertha was no longer at home to care for her. Emma had been diagnosed with uterine cancer. She died 8 months later at the poorhouse farm on June 23rd, 1935. She was buried in what's called the Stranger Lot at Mount Hebron Cemetery in Winchester. The red arrow marks that region, that area. Some of the graves there are marked, but Emma's is not marked. At some point, we would like to give markers placed at all three women's graves, because you've noticed one is overgrown, the other one has no marker, and now we know where that Emma is in the Stranger Lot, but we don't know where there. We have left bookmarks at the library and Abram's Delight. One last mission of our group is to locate especially more of the artwork by Bertha and Maria, and possibly writings or books by Emma. Who knows who could have a painting? Maybe in your great-grandmother's house on the wall or in a closet, or in a local consignment shop, or at an upcoming auction. We would appreciate you keeping a lookout for any of the fruits of these women's labors. The bookmark has examples of the signatures of Maria and Bertha and our contact information. Cheryl will now bring our talk to a close.
Prominently placed in the front of the book we are working on is this quotation by a contemporary author. Throughout history, knowledge rises and falls, ebbs and flows. What once was known is forgotten again, lost in time, sometimes for centuries, only to be rediscovered ages later. That rediscovery has certainly happened here, and it came more than a century after they lived among us at Winchester, Middletown, Strasburg, and Fisher's Hill. The Fisher's Hill Ladies Project happened when we tugged on a tiny thread. It was a snippet in an 1880s newspaper filler about Bertha Von Hillen's studio at Fisher's Hill. 4 years later now, this entire story has unraveled from that 1 or 2 sentence little mention. And the research story even continues today. We very unexpectedly fit some puzzle pieces together as we prepared for this Zoom meeting. Probably the single most important accomplishment of the Fisher's Hill Ladies Project has been finding the art and the writings of the ladies and pulling them together so that they can be studied and better understood. None of the 3 of us in the project are professional writers or professional art historians, so we are a little bit out of our comfort zone in some respects on this project. Generally, though, we are very decent researchers. One of the things that we feel very good about as a result of this project is we have found 10 works by Bertha when it has been thought for years that there were none that survived. Of that 10, 6 are paintings and 4 are illustrations. There are now 30 works found for Maria. 19 of those are paintings and 11 are illustrations. All 3 of us believe that there are many, many more by both artists. They could be easily here in the valley. There were many valley scenes painted. Many of them carry names like Mount Olive and Massanutten and Front Royal and Strasburg and Woodstock. And I mean, there are many paintings to be found, and they could be found anywhere in the United States because of the way that they did their exhibitions and expositions. Christopher Volpe, the artist and art historian who shined a light on Maria's work over 10 years ago, commented then, her achievement is not so much her work, but how early she created it, how successful she became, and against what odds. The same comment applies really to all 3 women. They all 3 defied the odds. And all 3 of us in the Fisher's Hill Ladies Project are sincerely appreciative of your support and your interest throughout the project. And some of you have helped with shouldering the expense, and we're very appreciative of that as well. This has truly been a community effort, and we thank you for it. And Barbara, I'll turn it back over to you and let you field the questions for us.
Thank you very much, everybody. We'll keep that beautiful picture on the screen for a while. A couple of questions are beginning to come in. One is how you 3 selected which woman you were going to talk about, and was there something unique about them that attracted you to that particular person or surprising? Start with Cheryl. You want to start first?
Okay, sure. I probably picked Maria because hers is, to me, the most complex. And I've been much more in depth with her. And so I felt like I was going to be better with it. I am also personally intrigued by some things that we didn't have time to talk about in today's meeting. Along with her Catholic faith, there's her fervid belief that she had a 6th sense. And she had a long interview about that with a man named Julian Hawthorne, who was a writer and the son of Nathaniel Hawthorne, the well-known American writer. But I find Maria very, very interesting.
Neil?
It was Bertha's pedestrianism that really drew me to her. At this point in my life, I thought that, traveling 22 miles on foot, which is the furthest I've ever gone, was a long distance.
Yeah.
I found out it was not even close. And I had not heard of pedestrianism before. I wish I'd heard about it when I was a little bit younger and race walking, because I absolutely cannot stand running. but it's more than just walking a long distance. To do something like that requires strategy and thinking about it. You're constantly going to have to adjust your pace. You're going to have to decide how long you're going to walk, when you're going to stop and rest, when you're going to start back again, for how long. So there's a lot of planning that goes into those sort of distances. And when you're walking roughly 50 plus miles in a day, that is just absolutely amazing. And keep in mind, this was before, you know, Nike shoes and good equipment, and it's just unimaginable the late 1800s to be doing that, in my mind. So I was fascinated by that, and fascinated about Bertha's walks and her feats in pedestrianism. And growing up in art, my father was an industrial graphic artist. It also, that she was an artist as well, really I found her fascinating. So yeah, that's what drew me to Bertha.
Did she receive compensation for her walking? Is that a paid professional? Yes. Okay.
Oh yeah. So people were paying to go see these events, and she was making money from it. Enough so that she was able to retire in 2 years, which is absolutely amazing. So she got enough money in that short 2 year time to then go and study art full time.
Wow. Thank you. Okay. And Hope, you're up next.
Well, I'll give an honest answer, and then I'll give you an answer that you probably really want to hear. Okay.
Oh. You want both. Okay.
Cheryl, like the more complicated person, complex. I like the least. I had less to learn, but no, I do like writing, and with all three women, I think they really came alive when you could make the local connections, you know, and see where they lived. In the newspaper articles, you know, they referenced things outside of our area, but also, you know, reference things in our area. In fact, some of Emma's writings included like places that all of you would recognize, like Lyric's Tavern, Wayside Inn, Belgrove. So
Good. Thank you. Okay, we have a question for, see if you got a genealogy work. Are there descendants of these women? Well, they don't expect they had children, but what about their siblings? And I believe somebody had a brother, right?
Yeah, the Bertha worked hard on Bertha's background. We were never able to make the connection in Germany. There's never been any discussion that she had siblings in the American press. We believe that her father died first and her mother died second. In the case of Maria, she was a firstborn in the family. She had 3 brothers who followed her in birth. And unfortunately, every single one of them passed away in childhood. And it was one of the very sad influences, I think, in her life. Then the last child born was her brother. He was younger in years, John, and he went by John Beckett. And he was not married. He was a priest for a number of years. He had converted after Maria had the sudden conversion in 1864. John and their mother also converted within a year. And we believe it was just before the 1866 fire in Portland. In the case of Emma actually had a niece that was named for her. And that got a little confusing till we figured that out when Emma Howard White was showing up in other states. I have tried hard through some of the genealogy sites such as Ancestry and others to find other pictures and to find connections. And generally the ones that I've found were disinterested. So yes, there were at least some descendants from Emma, but none of being interested in the project or her life.
Okay. Thank you. Couple questions about your book. When do you think it'll come out? Do you have an estimated publishing date? And will the newspaper articles that Hope read also be part of the book?
The book, I am hopeful, will be mid-spring. It keeps being pushed back and pushed back for a lot of reasons, but my hopeful would be then. I'm not sure yet how much of something like what Hope was reading will be included, but some of it certainly will. There's Emma was very prolific in her writing, and there's a lot to choose from.
Well, and if people are interested, I mean, even on the Hanley Archive site, if you just go into the newspaper link there and put in Emma Howard White, you will get probably about 3 pages of things credited to her. And I think, Barbara, didn't you say 1 or 2 of her books are
I was
in
just
the
going to say
library?
the archives has at least 2 copies of Emma's books that you need to go into the archives to see them. And one of them has a gift plate in the front of it, and Emma herself gave it to the library. So you could go in and see those in person. And we also have a book that people could check out about the pedestrians. It's all about the whole pedestrian movement and talks quite a bit, of course, about Bertha in that book. And that book people could check out and take home. So we'll have to, I want to invite you to come back and have a book program when you have the book and a book signing, and maybe be able to meet in person when things are a little bit safer for everybody. So I hope that'll get on your agenda. So
Good.
Go ahead.
I don't know if there are any of these folks out there who are interested in research tools, but one of the things that we'd be willing to provide you for distribution to anyone interested in the subject is, one of the things that keeps slowing us down on the book are the research tools and the expansion of the research tools. The landscape for research is just changing on a daily basis. It literally is. Not only expanding existing tools, but adding new tools. It's just shocking what you can find. We know what steamer they were on from New York to Boston, and we have a copy of the menu that they chose from, and we know everything about that steamer ride. And it's those kinds of things that you can now find online. Wouldn't have been there even 5 years ago.
I thought you had a nationwide detective company that's out looking for things. No, the internet's your friend. Okay, great, wonderful. Yeah. One little, speaking of detective work, so the fire on their home in Middletown, do you think that might have been because Emma took on a developer and went to court and there was some sort of retribution, or something worse? No thoughts?
I'll to answer that.
It's possible.
Possible. I mean, that was a woman to take on a man anyway, and then win. And
yeah,
I don't think we'll ever know for sure.
Sure. Yeah, it's not probably something the newspaper covered.
Well, no one was ever charged with arson.
So
that we found.
A lot of bad things going on. Yeah, and poisoning a dog, that's that's the worst. So let's see. Okay, a lot of interest in the book. So we will we'll have the email for everybody that registered, so we can get back in touch when you have a publication date. If you want, we can let people know. So this started, Cheryl, you just happened to read a sentence in the paper, or was there some link to where you live, some property link? I'm trying to remember what I've read about how you got started.
Yeah, I was working on I was doing a little bit of research relating to the railroad there at Fisher's Hill and the picnic grounds, which abut each other. And so I don't know, I was certainly looking up the phrase Fisher's Hill and came across this Bertha Von Hillen studio in Fisher's Hill. And who's ever heard of a studio in Fisher's Hill? I mean, that just doesn't happen. And that's, I started looking up Bertha, and then that led to Maria, and eventually led to Emma Howard White. And it just, that's the way it went.
It's fascinating. What what women were doing then, what, what we think they were, everybody wasn't in log cabins or, making apple butter. And, it's just, it's fascinating. And to see lives on top of what was going on in American history is always wonderful, what individual stories we can find
Yes.
out. Yeah.
In fact, one of the layers to this whole story, and hopefully it will be seen in the book, is what life was like in the 1880s. It was not primitive, as you're saying.
Right.
And I mean, their life was really not that much different than ours today. They didn't have computers. They had gorgeous menus with menu selections like we would love to have. They had an orchestra, full orchestra on that overnight steamer. You would get on the steamer at 5 or 6 p.m. in the evening and arrive in the morning fresh.
Wow. Yeah. Great. No.
The pictures of the hotels where these ladies stayed are just shocking.
It's wonderful. Well, I think we're running out of questions, but as I tell everybody, we will send information. Feel free to contact the library if there's any questions you have for me, and I will pass them on to our wonderful presenters. Lots of good comments coming in. Appreciation of you doing all this work and taking the time this morning and sharing it with us here at the Handley Regional Library System. So have a wonderful rest of the day and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.